Hello, my name is Dan Dyck, and you're listening to Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives, a show about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. Thanks for tuning in. Johannes Klaassen, or John, as we'll call him in today's story, firmly stood with his conscience and against government authorities. He paid for that decision with his life. John was the fourth child of Michael and Margaretha Jansen. He was born in a sod house 65 miles from the town of Menno in Washita County, Oklahoma, in 1895. Here is his story as told through the diary of his father, Michael Klaassen. Michael writes, "We called him Johannes, a strong boy. Before John was born, the couple had already lost 2 of their children in infancy and another in a miscarriage. Already struggling to farm with compromised health, Michael is elected minister of his church the same year John is born. Michael's position as minister will play an important role in John's life. Michael's church ministry grows alongside his teaching job. Soon he is serving 3 different congregations. He becomes involved in the wider Western Conference and the even bigger General Conference of Mennonites, traveling to meetings and events. Later on, there will be tensions with conference church leaders when John is called up for military service. There are great expectations and high hopes for young John, who is the family's oldest living son. Michael writes, "Since we were always living in very modest conditions with regards to income, I had always said to my dear wife, 'Just wait till John is grown, then we will see better days.' She didn't really want to believe that." Margaretha's doubts foreshadow John's future, but Michael writes, "Nevertheless, John grew strong, his studies moderate, and he had great desire to farm." In 1908, at 13 years old, John's mother turns ill and dies. John's father writes, "She had always taken the load with her prophetic knowledge, but she had a premonition of this. When I told her while she was sick that next Wednesday, February 2nd, was John's birthday, she said, 'Yes, I wonder whether something else will happen.' And so it was. On February 2nd, we took our dear deceased from home to the cemetery." John is left motherless along with his 5 siblings. "Oh, I can't say what grief ransacked us," writes his father. John acquires a stepmother in 1911 when his father marries Katharina Dahlke. By now it is apparent that income from renting out the farmland is inadequate. John's father writes, "Our outward circumstances had improved since John took care of the farm, but already in the later years we had better income because of good milk cows, etc." Things are finally beginning to look up for the beleaguered Klaassen family. The farm is beginning to prosper. 2 of John's sisters get married, and John's stepmother has given birth to 3 more siblings, a number that would later grow to 6. With John looking after the farm, Father Michael is free to enjoy the church ministry work he loves. But darkness is on the horizon. John's father writes that in the spring of 1917, the U.S. had declared war on Germany. That brought us Mennonites into a difficult situation. On June 5th, all young men between 21 and 30 had to be registered. Also, our young John had to go, as well as 16 young men of our church. At first, the parents of the young conscripts are told that farmers won't have to serve, and that conscientious objectors can declare their status on government registration forms. Michael is further consoled that John might be exempt due to his weak eyesight. These consolations were short-lived. John is first in his group of peers to be called up during examinations at the courthouse in Cordell, Oklahoma. John's father is shocked. In his role as minister, he visits Oklahoma City on 4 occasions to plead with higher authorities on behalf of the young conscripts, but to no avail. Mennonite churches in Washita County are united in their advocacy for exemptions from military service for their young men. When their petitions fail, leaders from the Western District and General Conference Mennonite churches go to Washington, D.C., and appeal to the highest courts. John's father is dejected. All work was in vain, he writes. They deceived and deluded us in order to draw us into the net, and the enemy was allowed to draw the snare. We have often blamed ourselves later why we didn't keep away from everything right from the beginning. Why did we allow registration? But it was presented in such an innocent manner. No one was supposed to do anything against his conscience. Good promises were given in Washington. Why did we allow the young men to be examined? They promised, and we believed too easily. They consider sending their young men to Canada, where they've heard there is still freedom of conscience. But they fear anyone caught deserting military service will be shot dead. Then they hear that the Canadian border is closed, and such plans are abandoned. Finally, President Wilson announces two alternatives for conscientious objectors. They can choose to serve in non-combatant roles or be detained at a camp. That was the decisive event for us, writes John's father. We thought the war wouldn't last longer than a few months, and for spring, John could be home again. John gets his red card, calling him to report for service in Cordell on October 4th. Michael expresses regrets for not further pursuing their escape to Canada while they still had time. Differences of opinions among conference leaders have failed to provide the solid support the young recruits were hoping for. At first, they were advised to, quote, go as far as possible conscience-wise, unquote. But then, some conference leaders discussed how they should, quote, show loyalty to the government and how we could help our country, unquote. John and his fellow recruits traveled to Cordell. Here, Michael writes, he faces derision. Officials looked for spite and savagery of war. In Cordell, families bid tearful farewells. In what turns out to be a foreboding moment, Michael writes that John asked for forgiveness for anything with which he had grieved us. Once processed, the recruits are put on a train to Camp Travis just outside of San Antonio. Michael and the support committee are not allowed to accompany them on the same train. They follow on another train, which then has a car of English recruits added. Word of the Mennonite conscientious objection has traveled. Some of the English recruits came to the back door of our car and emitted sounds which reminded us of demons. Really, they acted as if they were mad. Conversations with officials at Camp Travis once again offer a glimmer of hope. The first agent Michael meets suggests John should have been left at home. A meeting with Generals Murphy and Allen follows. Michael describes the generals as friendly gentlemen and reports that John has chosen not to wear a uniform, which John later confirms personally with the generals. John's refusal to wear a uniform and refusal to work on Sundays at his assigned job minding the camp store produce a scolding from his superior officer. At John's physical exam, the matter of his weak eyesight is dismissed. The doctor thinks John is pretending and storms and fumes terribly while examining him. Time passes, and subsequent visits from family and the support committee take place. The men are variously put to work in the camp barn, kitchen, or store. By Christmas, the young men realize their activities are contributing to war services. 16 of the men withdraw from all work activities. They are transferred to a tent camp at Travis, Texas, where they stay until May. On one Saturday, the men are commanded to wear their uniforms by Monday. 60 men refuse. 200 soldiers on horseback arrive to intimidate the men, who are eventually moved to a nearby walled fortress. Here they camp for 4 unsheltered days under the hot sun. General Allen appears and offers objectors a chance to withdraw from their position of refusing to wear uniforms. Some men give in, and the number of objectors is reduced from 60 to 45. A war council is convened and ultimately sentences all who refuse military service to 25 years in prison. They are shackled and chained in twos and led out of town in a public display of ridicule and derision. The remaining objectors are taken to a prison in Leavenworth, Kansas. They are heavily guarded, but eventually earn the trust of their keepers and get more freedom. They are allowed to write letters home. 1918 is a grief-filled year for the Klaassen family. In spring, John's infant sister dies at just 9 days old. In May, his 3-year-old brother dies of pneumonia. John's brother-in-law, Gus Dalkey, already married for 7 years, is called up for a physical exam. The community fears more older men will be called up. By mid-August, 4 families decide to leave for Canada. The Dalkey family and John's sister Margaret and her husband Herman Horn are among a group who travel by car to Laird, Saskatchewan. That summer and fall, 16 families move from Oklahoma to Canada to evade mandatory military service. On October 16th, officials at Leavenworth send a telegram alerting Michael that John is very ill with pneumonia. Michael immediately travels to Kansas to see his son, but arrives too late. John has died. Michael pleads to see his son's body, but is refused. John's body is sent by express train to Clinton, Oklahoma, from where he is carried home to the Klaassen farm. Michael writes in his diary, "A number of friends had got together at our house. We opened the coffin, and what did we find? It was my John, but in uniform. Immediately these clothes were taken off and his own put on. I said, 'If you have refused the uniform in life, you shall not wear it in death.'" By this time, Michael and his family had already decided to move to Canada. But first, they must bury John. There is still some disagreement among Mennonites regarding the uniform question. About the funeral, Michael writes, "That I didn't allow him to keep the uniform on seemed rather doubtful to some of the brethren." The Klaassen family prepares to leave for Canada on November 4th. That morning, 2 men from church arrive and advise them to make haste, for they have heard that Michael's life is in danger from a gang. The Klaassens leave immediately, without the customary farewells to their friends or the church. The family arrives at Rosthern, Saskatchewan on November 8th, where they are taken in by Michael's brother Jacob, who had emigrated to Canada 6 months earlier. It turns out that they made it to Canada just in time. In the turmoil of World War I, Mennonites are viewed with suspicion, and by June 1919, the Canadian government bans Mennonites from entering Canada. Numerous members of the Klaassen family were keen diarists. Their many volumes and journals reside at the MHA and document migrations from Russia to Asia, back to Russia, then to the USA, and their move from USA to Canada. Their international migrations all appear to be prompted by the belief in non-resistance as they seek exemptions from military service. Some of the Klaassen family later moved from Saskatchewan to Morden, Manitoba, where John's father Michael establishes the Herald Church. It eventually merges with the Morden Berktaler Mennonite Church, which today is the Morden Mennonite Church. But these are stories for another time. Meanwhile, you can read these journals for yourself at the Mennonite Heritage Archives. You can also check out sample images from these documents related to this episode at mharchives.ca.
I'm Archivist Conrad Stace. This program is made possible through support from Golden West Radio and listeners like you. If you want to support this program and the work of the archives, you can find out how to do that on our website at mharchives.ca and click on Support.
Michael Klaassen's writings were translated from German to English by his daughter, Esther Bergen. We are indebted to Esther. This program is supported by the Tales team of Gray Munra, Kaylee Dyck, and Conrad Stace. Join me next week for a story about a group of Mennonites who migrated from Russia to Central Asia in the early 1880s. I'm your host, Dan Dyck. Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives will be back next week with another story about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. Thanks for listening.